Hi, Bernell, Sarah, and Emily. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Pleasure to be with you. Thank you so much.
Awesome. I'm
Glad to
very
be here.
excited to chat with you all because you all are BARD alum and you all are doing some really, really amazing work in the social impact space. And very excited to be able to round out these conversations we've been having about how do you build an anti-racist organization and how do you increase diversity, equity, inclusion in businesses. So to kick it off, I'd love for you, and we can go ahead and go with Bernell. I'd love for you to just share a little bit about yourself and the work that you're currently doing.
Okay, well, again, thank you for having us. And my name is Bernell Grier, and I run an organization called IMPACCT Brooklyn. It used to be called Pratt Area Community Council. It's sort of the doing business as name. We started in 1964, but I joined the company in 2016 as its executive director. Prior to joining, though, I had a long career in banking and spent about 30 years in banking, and then went into the non-for-profit world, ran an organization called Neighborhood Housing Services of New York City, worked there for about 10 years, and then moved on to thinking I wanted to go back into banking with the Federal Home Loan Bank of New York, and left there shortly after joining. I think I spent about 5 months there, and then went back into the non-for-profit world, where my passion is and has been for several years. I am a native New Yorker.
Awesome. Can you share a little bit about what you do at Impact Brooklyn or what it does as an organization?
So IMPACCT Brooklyn is a community development corporation. So we're really based in central Brooklyn. Our offices are down at Dean Street in Crown Heights. And what we do is really to be able to support the community at large, the residents and people that live in central Brooklyn. We actually serve all of Brooklyn, but our focus is on central Brooklyn, to be able to have stable housing, to be able to have access to great businesses and to support those small businesses, and to also promote just again social justice and the right to affordable housing. We are a real estate developer, and we also own over 1,000 units of housing throughout central Brooklyn.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. I cannot wait to get into that. And is it one of these, and in New York, that's really interesting. Is it a private-public partnership? So it's a combination?
No, we are a not-for-profit. We
Okay.
are supported, our revenue stream is from both, government grants, donations and contributions, as well as earned income. So when we develop property, because we not only own, but we develop property, when we do, we earn fees for our development, and that helps us to support our other programs. And some of that too is about home ownership, helping to promote a home ownership, and also help people to guard against foreclosure. So we've got a lot of things happening with a small force of people. We're under 40 employees, but doing, just what I call God's work in the community.
I love it. I love it. I can't wait to learn more about it. Thank you so much. And Emily?
Great. Hi. So nice to be with you today. Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk a little bit about the work that Groundswell does here in the Washington, D.C. region, but also in other states as well. Groundswell is on a mission to build community power. We performed primary research a few years ago, I think it was about 5 years ago, that identified that about 20% of Americans pay 10% of their annual income or more just towards their utility bills. And it was really identifying and quantifying this energy burden that continues to drive the work that we do today. We are a nonprofit community solar developer and subscriber management services delivery partner, which means that we interact both with low and moderate income households seeking to take control of their electricity bills through the savings that can be offered by the solar projects that we and other solar developers build. My role at Groundswell is as CFO, and I work primarily, overseeing our organization finances, of course, but was really pleased to find my way to the organization after the BARD MBA program, during which I really identified the nexus of sustainability and social justice as my passion. And Bernell, I was really excited to hear you use that word and talk about how it drives the work that you do today. And that's the journey that I went on. I come from a background of technology project management, and was able to leverage that with my interest in finance and clean energy to design a position at Groundswell focused on our subscriber management services business, line of business that we offer, the proprietary platform that we develop, and then also supporting the financing of the community solar projects that we design and develop.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you all for the stats. That's really interesting about the 20% and 10%. That's pretty shocking. And Sarah?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. So I currently am up in Hartford, Connecticut, where I'm the executive director of an organization called Reset Social Enterprise Trust. We are the only public general accelerator program offered in Hartford, but really we were founded with the belief that every business has a responsibility to do better. Our founder about 12 years ago, Kate Emery, really, she was running an IT company and wanted to make that company into a social enterprise, and was like, there's no resources here to learn how to do this. What does it mean? What do I need to do legally to protect myself? And so out of that early desire that she had, she really just started to catalyze conversations with folks up in this area. And we now have evolved over the last 12 years. So, we do a lot of work supporting entrepreneurs, and are really coming from a perspective that it's not only kind of the impact that a business is making through what they do, but it's also who is involved in running that business and how we're catalyzing the people from right here in Hartford. So we, as I said, it's a general program, so we have, a wide variety of industries, and we're really looking to, support and enable the best ideas to kind of rise to the top and make sure that they're getting access to the resources and tools that they need to thrive. In addition to that, we have a history more in the policy space. Reset was pretty instrumental in getting the benefit corporation legislation passed for the state of Connecticut. And so we still, try to make sure that we're advocating on behalf of our entrepreneurs, and, making sure that we're a sounding board for them to be heard at a policy level. And we try to, wherever we can, kind of provide value through partnerships and events to just spread the word more broadly about this kind of work. I also kind of got here through the BARD work. In essence, I actually was a dancer originally, so very entrepreneurial background in that way. I was in New York for many years, but found my way to the BARD MBA, kind of looking for a change in career that could be a little bit more purpose-driven for myself, and also had the pleasure of working for a few years in DC with immigrant entrepreneurs, primarily all women, but primarily immigrant and refugee women, which was just incredibly eye-opening and kind of got me into this space of really thinking about inclusive economic development with a social justice lens. And I'm excited to have this conversation today, because it has been just a crazy year with a lot more kind of prominence coming up with all of this. And just, I will say, just beautiful, because Reset was founded from the get-go in community, really like bringing together, we're a very small team, but we work very closely with a lot of partners in the region, and that's been just blowing up this year to see, how important and essential it is to the success of our entrepreneurs.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. And I think the thing that gets me excited about this conversation is through your diverse background and the work that you do, you're really showing that there's a lot of infrastructure that needs to be built up. It's not as if organizations who want to become anti-racist or more just operate in a silo. It's within a larger system, right? They don't operate in a vacuum. And you all are tackling different aspects of what a just economy could look like. So I'd love to kind of hear from each of you, what does kind of social justice look like from the lens of like the work that you do? And one of the terms we've been using is kind of JEDI, which is justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And I know there's a lot of those kind of terms, but what does kind of social justice look like from the perspective of the type of work that you do? And we'll go ahead and kick it off with Bernell.
Okay, well, just overall, again, being a community development corporation, I'd say it's really in our DNA. Everything that we do, our work, and when we look at, first of all, we serve all of Brooklyn, but our focus has been Central Brooklyn, and that's historically been an area that's really communities of color. When you look at Fort Greene, Clinton Hill, Bedford-Stuyvesant, Crown Heights. When I came on board, it was, one of the first things that was said to me is, Bernell, what are you going to do about gentrification? And it's like, are people being pushed out? What are the different economic variables that are happening? What's happening to the people that have long lived here? And maybe because of the laws and what have you that had been put in place were the only place that Black people had to live, because of segregation and what have you. So for our work is very much being able to have people maintain, to be able to stay where they have family and roots, and to be able to fight the being pushed out, the eviction. We were championing, we helped to champion the change in the eviction laws, or, again, and the rent stabilization and all of those things. As an organization too, with small businesses, who also have been pushed out, trying to help them with ways to negotiate with their landlords, on the home ownership front, the foreclosure intervention, but also there's a lot of people that still want to buy. And do you know how to buy the right way if you don't come from a generation of homeowners? So with all of this, it's been really trying to set, to level the playing field. I was
Yeah.
excited when I attended Bard College, and also, for the MBA program, and also learned that part of sustainability is all of this in terms of economic mobility and racial equity and all of that. So, just that also heightened, my work.
Yeah, and you're making me think of a couple things. So one, like existing organizations, there's that element and of how do you make them more diverse. But I think the other side is when you're working in the work in Brooklyn, one, are there businesses that are emerging from the community and making sure that the businesses reflect in some ways the ownership and the makeup of what the community actually looks like? And what are some of the resources that you provide for businesses either to start or grow, especially businesses that might be people from the community or reflect what the community is made up of demographically?
Right. So we have long had a relationship. We have a program for small businesses that we call Rolling Up the Gates. And that's where, again, in a lot of buildings, you find that there's commercial spaces. Folks need to know how to negotiate their leases. So we developed a relationship with Struck, the law firm of Struck, and they provide pro bono support to small businesses that we work with, and to be able to help them to negotiate their leases with the landlords. And or, and what we have found is that when you're able to have options on your lease, option to extend for another 5 years. You might have, whatever amount of time, but knowing those terms and the legalese and breaking it down to common language for the business owner to be able to have a stable space. I will tell you that my dream is getting to have business owners be able to own their facilities, to own their buildings. During this time of COVID, we actually have secured some funding to be able to provide grants to small businesses. And we've also helped them to fill out their PPP applications and other things with the City of New York, with SBS and others, but really being able to handhold the business owners. And then on top of that, just just sort of the commercial corridor organizing. So, we helped to create the Fulton Street bid, the Fab Alliance, 10 years
Yeah,
ago.
totally.
So that's part of our work. We're on the Myrtle Avenue Revitalization Project bid. We also working with the Bed-Stuy bid, where we're looking to organize the merchants along Flatbush Avenue between Empire Boulevard and Parkside. So, just really organizing not just the people, but the businesses in the community.
Yeah, and I mean, I'll for those listeners, I lived in the area that Bernell is talking about for almost a decade, and I've seen the positive impact that each of those initiatives that you shared on all those streets. And I think the thing that's so important for people who are listening to understand is yet there's these organizations that are trying to adopt these practices, but I think the other is that we need organizations like Bernell's that creates that connective tissue and to a large extent the infrastructure and the glue, so that organizations that are led by people of color but also diverse thrive in communities.
Right. I just wanted to add that one of the reasons why I want to see businesses own their property is largely when we did work along Fulton Street, a lot of the merchants that had been there for years were displaced. And
Gotcha.
they were Black-owned businesses, so again, looking at the overall equity, but if they had a chance to own that property, they would probably still be present or renting out to other people
Yeah,
and other businesses. Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. Awesome. Emily, I'd love to kind of hear your perspective in terms of where social justice fits in kind of the work that you all do.
Absolutely. So I want to take this, I guess, in a few different layers. So, as I mentioned earlier, there are households that are suffering disproportionately under a much greater energy burden and paying large portions of their annual income just towards their utility bill, right? That's separate from, housing and medical bills and car notes and all of the other expenses that we have. And so there is, an immediate need to address that payment inequity, right? Who is paying what portion of their income just towards their utility bills. So that's one very impactful layer of social justice within the energy sector. But Bernell, I was again very excited to hear you talk about ownership because that's a piece of of energy as well. Is who owns the systems, particularly solar systems or other power plants that are generating power for our communities. Within the solar sector, we see the entire finance structure really focused on those who have wealth get to retain the wealth. It's a tax credit that has driven a lot of solar deployment in the US. It's a tax credit that is much more difficult to monetize if you don't have tax liability or tax exposure. So we really see the whole system working to kind of retain and keep the certain financial systems in place. And so one thing that Groundswell has done that I'm very proud of to be a part of this team focused on it is figuring out how can we drive wealth creation throughout the entire ecosystem. A lot of what people look at when job opportunities with solar are around installation. And those are good jobs, absolutely. They are also seasonal jobs. They're not necessarily providing, year-round employment or wage earning opportunities. And also, the real wealth creation opportunities with solar aren't just at the installation level. It's, who is owning the system, who is receiving the renewable energy credits that might be available, who is receiving the tax credit that I mentioned earlier. How can we help small businesses build, or maybe an electrician that might want to transfer their skills over into the solar sector? How can we really use the entire value chain to push wealth creation out beyond, certain smaller groups that have, traditionally held the power to date. So there's really a systems question there. And then last, from kind of a concept level, is just energy democracy and who has the right to generate their own power. We see a lot of struggles in the policy world around, how can homeowners install solar systems? How large can those systems be? What is the value that they are given for the solar power that they are generating? So it's happening on a state by state level based off of the way that the U.S. System works. And there's certainly leaders and there's laggards as well. But these to me are really the primary elements of when I think about social justice within energy. It's helping people pay their bills and take control of their electricity bills, but there's also kind of a system restructure, and then there's also who has the right to generate their own power, especially as it comes from the sun and falls down on all of us.
Absolutely. And I do appreciate that you're kind of thinking at all these different layers. For Be Social Change, we've had solar companies that have talked about this, but it's really about just the cost savings, but not necessarily, again, in the context of who is benefiting and is it disproportionately benefiting other people. So thank you. And then Sarah, I'd love to hear, I think you operate in a different perspective, and I'm going to go into each of your organizations, but you have the organization, but then you also have organizations that you are directly working with. So I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you. Well, and I'm hearing some overlaps with both of what Emily and Bernell have shared too, which I love. I think that's just kind of shows the intersections between all of this work. And I really, personally, I'm also I spend a lot of time thinking at the systems level as well, because I think that is, ultimately where all of us are sitting in terms of just, we're intervening in a lot of different points, all of us. So I just really appreciate hearing that that piece. And I will say, I think at Reset, we're using entrepreneurship as the tool for social justice, right? We're thinking about, entrepreneurship in a lot of ways can be a great equalizer. It's part of this American dream, whether whether that's real or not at this point. I won't go completely into that, but I think, the way that we're trying to tackle this is really, entrepreneurship should be a great equalizer, but it does take a level of connectivity, that connective tissue, like you said. It's not enough to just say, I have a great idea, if you don't have the networks, the access to capital, the, support systems around you. And that's something that, like, folks in Silicon Valley and folks that have historically been able to succeed in these spaces have been able to leverage things that they've gotten through privilege. I include myself in that. I have a great education. I have an amazing network that I know it's okay for me to call and say, hey, I need a favor. I need a connection to so-and-so. And that's not a given for a lot of the clients that we work with. We're really trying to, be part of that network, be that network, expand that network, invite everyone into that network so that, we're walking alongside them on their journeys. And I think that's one of the things that we really spend a lot of time on, kind of the way that we're building culture within our programs. How are we making sure that there's enough trust and enough of that, true collaboration and an environment that enables that to happen. So that it's not just us saying, oh, here's what you got to do, go do your thing, but that we're enabling the structures to grow. Yeah. I mean, the other piece of it, I think that, there are certain, I guess, aspects of the way that because like you said, we're working with entrepreneurs. So we have certain things within our business, but also importantly, I think the way that we're trying to instill certain things earlier on when somebody's just starting out, it might take a few years to be at a scale where you can be hiring a team and, like, thinking about your own kind of diversity and equity and inclusion as you grow. But we're really, we're doing our best to instill that early on, as well as thinking about, other aspects. So we have a whole program focused on food entrepreneurship. And within that, there's a whole lot of things that we're talking about in terms of, Hartford is a food desert, and, really using the tools that we have through these programs to also address kind of the bigger problems of the community. But I think at the heart of it, it comes back to a lot of the things that have already been said, of, like, there's a lot of amazing talent and ideas and people that probably have great solutions, but they may lack the networks or the visibility to, take them to fruition. So that's really where we come in and trying to, break down those barriers. I'll just end with this sentiment, because I know we've all seen that, the visual of the baseball diamond. There's a fence and everybody's at a different height, and you've got the stool to get the equity piece figured out, right? So everybody can see over the fence. But I think ultimately we're also at the same time trying to break the fence down completely, and just, so I love, I think from Emily and Bernell also hearing that, like, there's systems that we're trying to change in the process. So on the one hand, enabling the entrepreneurs that we work with to work within the systems, but also to push against them. And then on the policy side to, to speak up when we can and when we have the opportunity to actually change the way that capital flows and the decision-making behind who gets to the top and who doesn't.
Yeah. And again, I think you all are approaching it from very different perspectives. And I think in the context of what you're doing is there's definitely organizations that are kind of doing top down or trying to change within. And then you're also creating kind of a groundswell or grassroots kind of movement from the bottom to try to change the economy and kind of the overall systems. And one of the things that I love, and there's definitely, I want to get into I'm curious a little bit more detail on kind of the practices of what you guys implement. And Bernell, how has 2020 kind of changed your organization, both in terms of the pandemic and all of the kind of social injustice that's occurred? Because I think one of the things that's fascinating is how are kind of anti-racist practices and thinking about equity, diversity, inclusion being further integrated into your organization? How are those conversations going or being started?
Well, it's really interesting. I had a board meeting this morning, and one of the first things that I said to the board is that as we work through the course of the year, we have to question, just how do we call ourselves? You know, for a long time, the work that we've done has been under the umbrella of the, you know, I think many of you have heard of the Community Reinvestment Act. You know, we used to get a lot of support from the banking community because you check the box, CRA. CRA is colorblind. It doesn't say that it's to help, you know, communities of color or Black people. You know, so for us, it's actually naming exactly what we're doing. So if we're in Central Brooklyn, that has been historically, you know, a Black community, you know, and when we look at our client base and look at the numbers, there might be an overlap of somewhat to low moderate income. But when we look at the complexion of the folks that we're working with, it's predominantly, again, people of color. So one is just in an organization, just admitting and talking about who we are. And with that, being able to have those conversations and to look at how are we managing things, when and then where we can influence the city of New York when they have housing lotteries or other, you know, when we're building housing, you know, just when we have the conversations and the city is putting together the policies and the processes and the term sheets, you know, can we be voice and to say, this is how it's going to impact, you know, you might have things in place, but how are we also shifting that? So I think a lot of it is mindfulness. You know, we've been doing this business for a long time, but not naming it. And I think it's now the time, and this is what 2020, the impact of COVID. And, you know, I will say that I actually did sort of an executive director statement saying, I'm seeing this every day. I'm getting a report that a friend, a family member, someone is sick or dying, and they all happen to be Black or brown people. And so, you know, is that just me because that's who most of my friends are? Or is it really something that's happening? And then following that, the New York Times comes out with, yes, it's disproportionately hitting, you know, the community. So for us, it really is, you know, it's been a shift in terms of just the work that we've always done, but giving a different name to the audience. And I think it's a great time for that.
Yeah, and I think you pointed out that as we move forward, one of the first steps to kind of that transformation is the acknowledgement, like the full acknowledgement of what's actually happening. And when you can get that out there, then you're able to take concrete steps to change. Emily, how has COVID and also just everything that's happened in 2020 changed the way that your organization is working outside of like possibly remote work a lot, but more in the context of kind of social justice?
Sure. So I would say that it really has amplified and made the work that we do even more urgent and more important. People were struggling with high energy bills even before the pandemic, and now it's even more so. So, you know, the urgency of deploying as many solar projects as we can, serving as many customers as we can, you know, is there, and it is amplified. There's been some tactical shifts as well. Of course, you know, enrollment for programs no longer takes place in person, but really, you know, overall, our mission has just been reaffirmed and unfortunately made much more necessary. I think something that's been important to me in my experience of working at Groundswell, what we did this year, and it ties in with Bernell, what you were talking about giving something a name, is we actually took time to write down our values. And this is actually helping us think about how we position our organization within the energy ecosystem more broadly, especially at a time when, you know, wealth disparities are increasing. So we, you know, there's a shared vision within the organization of inclusion, and we all want to work at an organization where everyone feels included. We also are all very motivated to work at Groundswell because of the mission. We're very values aligned with the work that we do. Many of us could go work in other energy companies, but we choose to work at Groundswell because of the impact and the focus of the work that we do. So we actually took the time to write down these values, and these values then informed a documented strategic plan that will guide our work over the next 3 years. And the thing that, you know, as someone coming from the numbers background that I really appreciate is that we actually have metrics around things like procurement, and how many projects are we going to build, how much saving or how much in savings will they deliver to households, what are the contracting companies that we will work with, who will provide the services that we need, how can we really see live the values that we've stated in terms of wanting to build wealth creation opportunities throughout the entire value chain. And so I think, again, the work that we're doing, we were already doing it. We know it's more important. Now we've had a chance to really document it and guide the work that we'll do over the coming 3 years to really help change the way that the system has been working. And it's just going to, the need for energy savings is greater. The need for more distributed wealth creation opportunities is greater. Energy tends to be a very white-led, a very male-led sector, and how can we as Groundswell use the power that we have, right, as a small organization, but we do have some control, and how can we position ourselves as partners to the voices that have been more marginalized but that are on the front lines, that are really suffering greater energy burden, greater energy impacts of climate change, greater impacts from the pandemic. We are in a well-supported, privileged position, and how can we use that to create more opportunities for others as well?
Yeah, amazing. And I love that you all documented it's very concrete, physical, and you have something to work off of. And then Sarah, how have you been implementing, both in your organization, but also possibly in the programmatic model for the accelerator?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Honestly, I think one of the first and probably most important things was, we had 4 programs running simultaneously when COVID hit, and they were all, very heavily in person. That's really always been the design. We want to create community, and doing that in person is, it makes sense. But obviously we immediately had to kind of pivot everything. But as we did that, we just, we knew we were going to have to kind of take a step back from the trajectory that we were on, and just kind of take the time to make sense of what was happening, what our businesses really needed from us and from each other at that point in time. So we kind of just took a step back and listened really hard, and have really tried to incorporate what we heard from particularly our Impact Accelerator cohort, who were with us for a 4-month period. I mean, it's a very intensive program, and they were just so generous and forthcoming with the feedback that they gave us. And we had a very diverse cohort, which was incredibly helpful to hear the various perspectives, because we did get a lot of different kinds of feedback. And in particular, I think one of the biggest things that has now shown up is, like Bernell, we've really tried to name the impacts that we're trying to make through who we are trying to reach. And we've really been much more explicit about, wanting to encourage BIPOC and women entrepreneurs to apply for these programs, and even drilling down into kind of the types of impact that we're looking for, businesses that are addressing community wealth building initiatives, or that are incorporating, thinking about worker ownership or incorporating workforce development. We are looking for those, and we are looking for even those ideas, and really getting explicit about naming those things has been a big first step. The other big thing that that's been new for us is, because again, we're very grassroots in a lot of ways, and kind of often we'll go back to those community roots to say, let's just get together. So we started a forum. Now it's monthly. It was weekly early on in COVID, that we've now titled "Creating the Future We Want to Inhabit," and it's been a really great way to stay in touch with our community, and not just our entrepreneurs, but we've invited organizers, we've invited funders, and policymakers, and it's sort of a who's ever in the room on a given week. We're looking to just create dialogue and kind of dig into all of this, and it's been again, I think a really important part of building the connective tissue, and also really making space for these conversations to happen, not just within, but beyond our organization. And so a lot of what we've talked about have been these kind of systemic inequities, and, drilling down into certain things like the widening education gap, and access to clean energy, and you name it. which has been, I think, really important to just have time to make sense of all of this in community during this absolutely insane time.
Yeah, absolutely. And the time has gone by so fast, and I appreciate all of your insights and stories. And to wrap things up, I'd love to hear from you all what's kind of one thing that the listeners, very diverse set of listeners, can take forward in terms of integrating social justice into their organization or to their community. What's maybe one thing even that you maybe have learned in 2020 that you'd like to share or that's been effective? And anybody can chime in.
I'll share one. This, a friend of mine up here in Hartford actually wrote this, so I can't claim credit, but Karen Hines, amazing woman up here, talked about, I think, instilling the value of diversity, equity, and inclusion rather than making it a priority. It's not enough to just put it on a list and check it off when you're done, because it's not done. And I think really approaching it and thinking of it as a value has been quite an important change in this year. And it's something that, I'm trying to talk about more in as many circles as I can.
Yeah, I love that shift. Bernell?
I would just echo what Sarah said, and it really is sustainability. Just really whatever you're doing, make sure it's long lasting and not just a reaction. We've talked about moment to movement. We just want to make sure that this is something that's ingrained. And when whether you're doing the study, reading books, I have a group now that we started a book club, and it's predominantly white women that are in it. And we have them reading things like The New Jim Crow, Emergent Strategy, a bunch of things, and just being able to have that dialogue and engaging, but it's shifting a mindset for the longevity.
Absolutely. And Emily?
My thoughts are somewhat along the same lines. I have just been doing a lot of reflecting, as I hope many people have, on the role that I can play, in creating a more diverse world, a world where everybody feels more included, and being actively anti-racist and thinking about what it means to be uncomfortable, having conversations that I may have, stepped away from in the past. And also understanding places where I should step back and somebody else, should be in a leadership role and be front and center. And so really thinking about, my individual actions and hoping that others are reflecting on theirs as well, and encouraging them and creating the conditions for people to take a step right into being a little bit uncomfortable, talking about race, talking about inclusion, talking about diversity, other people's experiences in America or in the world or in the energy sector as it may be, and understanding that there's a role for all of us to play in creating the future that we would like to inhabit.
Absolutely. And in wrapping up, you're making me think about what Bernell said earlier, which is really acknowledging and going through that process, but acknowledging where you're at kind of on an individual level, right? And where you're at along this journey. I think the second is then in the context of where your organization is, and also recognizing that this is not going to be something where you can get it done in a month and then everything is puppy dogs and ice creams and rainbows and everything is set. It's a lifelong journey that each of us are going to be on at all different levels. So having those understanding is going to be a lot of work that needs to be done on an individual and organizational level. So thank you so much for spending your time with us today.
Thank you so much. Really enjoyed this conversation. And Bernell and Sarah, it was so nice to see you again.
Yeah,
same here.
Same.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Great to be here.
Alrighty.